Your parents bought a house for about 3 years of their income. You'll pay 8, 10, in some cities more than 12. Same house. Same kind of ordinary family. Same first rung on the ladder. The price didn't drift ahead of your wage. It tripled against it. And here's the part nobody shows you. All the extra money didn't vanish into thin air. Someone is holding it. This is the story of where it went. And why the rung moved up the wall just in time to lock out everyone climbing after your parents. You're not worse with money than they were. You're standing at the bottom of the same ladder, reaching for a rung that used to be a step and is now a jump. Let me show you the number that proves it. It's simpler than anyone makes it sound. Take the price of a typical house, divide it by what a typical person earns in a year. That's the whole measurement. How many years of your entire income a roof over your head actually costs. When your parents bought, in much of the developed world, that number sat around 3 years of income for a house. Demanding, but reachable. A young couple could see the top of it. Today, in the cities where the work actually is, that same number is 8, 10. In some places, well past 12. Your wage didn't shrink by that much. Nothing about you changed by that much. The number did. And here's what should stop you. It didn't leap. It didn't crash into place in one bad year you could protest. It climbed, slowly, quietly, 1% at a time, which is exactly why no one ever stood up and called it what it was. So picture the ladder for a second. The bottom rung is the first home. For your parents, the climb was demanding, but the rungs were spaced for human arms. Now the bottom rung has been lifted to shoulder height. Everything above it unchanged, the climbers no weaker, many reaching higher than their parents ever did. But if you can't make that first jump, the entire ladder above it might as well not exist. The question is why, and the honest way to answer it is to take the obvious suspects one at a time and find the one that actually moved the rung. Start with the suspect everyone names first. Interest rates. It's a fair one. The cost of a house isn't just the price. It's the price plus the cost of borrowing. And your parents, in certain decades, paid eye-watering rates that look horrifying next to recent ones. So you'd think their burden was heavier, and that low rates should have made today easier. But here's the twist that clears this suspect. Those high rates came with low prices because expensive borrowing holds prices down. Their interest was brutal, but the number they were financing was small, and it could be refinanced later when rates fell. Today's buyer faces the opposite, cheap borrowing, layered on top of a price so high the loan dwarfs anything the previous generation took on, and cheap credit didn't sit there politely. It gave buyers more to bid with, which pushed prices up. Interest rates explain a piece of the monthly math. They don't explain why the rung moved. So it wasn't simply that. The second suspect is the popular one. It's you, the story everyone's heard. Young people just spend too much. The daily coffee, the takeout, the subscriptions, the holidays, the deposit frittered away one indulgence at a time. If they'd only been disciplined like the previous generation, the house would be theirs. It's a comforting story, especially for people who already own. The trouble is the arithmetic. The gap between a 3 times income house and a 10 times income house is measured in years of total earnings. Hundreds of thousands. No realistic amount of skipped coffee closes a gap that size. You could give up every small luxury for a decade and not bridge the distance the ratio opened up. The indulgences are real. They're just nowhere near big enough to be the cause. You cannot out-budget a tripling of the fundamental price, so it isn't that either. We've cleared the cost of borrowing. We've cleared personal spending. The cost is still there, still went somewhere. So what actually moved the rung? And this is where the ladder really starts moving. The real forces are the ones that changed what a house is. For your parents, a house was mostly a place to live that happened to hold its value. Over the last few decades, it quietly became something else, an asset class. One of the primary vehicles through which wealth is stored and grown across the developed world. And once a house becomes an investment, it stops being priced only by the wages of the families who want to live in it, starts being priced by everyone who wants to own it. Several forces pushed the same way at once. Cheap credit meant more money chasing the same homes. More borrowing power simply became higher bids. Investors, from individuals with a second property to large funds buying at scale, entered the market competing with first-time buyers for the very same starter homes. And underneath it all sat supply. In the cities where the jobs concentrated, restrictive zoning and slow building meant the number of homes barely grew while the people and the money wanting them surged. Demand stacked up. Supply held still. Price did the only thing it could. So notice what every one of these has in common. None of them is about the buyer's character. They're about the house being repriced by credit, by investment demand, by scarcity, as something to be owned and held, not merely lived in. The extra cost didn't vanish. It became wealth, held by those who already owned, growing on the very same asset the next generation is trying to reach. So here's the reveal, and it's the simplest thing in the whole story. The price of the house didn't drift slightly ahead of wages. The ratio, the years of income are home costs, roughly tripled in the places that matter. Wages crept up over those same decades. They did not triple. The two lines, which had moved together for generations, came apart and never rejoined. That's the entire mystery, resolved. You are not worse with money than your parents. You are not less disciplined, less hardworking, or less deserving. You are standing at the bottom of the same ladder, reaching for the same first rung, and the rung is simply higher than human arms were ever expected to reach. The climber didn't get weaker, the ladder moved, and this is why the comparison with your parents cuts so deep. Home ownership became more than shelter. It became the marker of having made it, of being a real adult, of arriving. So when the rung moves out of reach, it doesn't feel like a financial setback. It feels like a personal verdict. Earning more than your parents and still renting feels like a contradiction you must have caused. You didn't. The verdict was written into a number, years before you ever reached reach for the rung. Now, honesty requires the other side of the ledger. The houses themselves did change. Today's homes are often larger than the modest starter houses of decades past, with standards the previous generation didn't have. Mortgage products expanded, opening doors that were once closed. And not every earlier generation had it easy. Plenty faced brutal rates and recessions of their own. The past was not a paradise, and pretending otherwise would be its own distortion. But a bigger house you can't afford to buy is not an improvement in your life. The upgrades are real, they simply don't explain a tripling of the price-to-income ratio, and they're cold comfort to someone locked out of ownership entirely. Better houses, further out of reach, is not progress for the person on the ground, so return to the ladder one last time. And then look one rung further than yourself, because if the rung kept moving for an entire generation, the obvious question is whether it stops. What happens to the people who reach the bottom of the ladder a decade from now, if the line between prices and wages keeps drifting apart? The struggle you feel may not be the bottom of this story. It may be the middle of it. That's the real weight of the number. Not just that it locked out one generation, but that nobody has yet moved the rung back down. Here's the thing worth carrying out of all this, though. It's the moment you can see clearly that the ladder moved, and not you, something shifts. The shame loosens. The problem stops being a private failure you have to hide, and becomes a shared arithmetic you're allowed to name out loud and to expect the world to answer for. You climbed, the ladder moved, and the first honest step toward changing that is refusing to keep believing it was your fault.